I'm doing a great work and I cannot come down. Why should the work stop so I can come down to you? These are the words of Nehemiah as he built the walls fortifying Jerusalem over 2,000 years ago, as told in the book of Nehemiah in the Bible. Today we see, just as it was back then, that Jerusalem is the source of heavy conflict in the Middle East, with multiple groups of people vying for control over the ancient city, and global powers weighing in on the conflicts that have been brewing over centuries. Join us as we delve into the mystifying history of Jerusalem and Israel, exploring the ongoing struggles and complexities that have shaped this ancient area for over 2,000 years. Through riveting discussions, we unravel the mysteries surrounding Israel's pivotal role in global affairs, its significance in the Abrahamic faiths, and the intricate web of U.S. foreign policy in the broader Middle East. Get ready to expand your understanding of one of the most misunderstood regions on Earth, here on the Great Work Podcast. Thank you for tuning in to the Great Work Podcast. Today we have Ariel, who is an expert in Qatar, all things Qatar. So I thought that this would be a fun episode to talk about. I mean, we're talking a lot about Hamas. We're talking a lot about Iran. We are not talking about Qatar, who's both kind of an ally and an adversary in this conflict. So Ariel, do you want to explain a little bit about your background?
First, thanks for having me. It's a great pleasure. I am a PhD candidate in Israel, and not many in Israel research this country. Mainly they focus the Palestinians and Egypt, and mainly the neighbors of Israel. And the Gulf in general, it's kind of neglected here. This is why lately you can see more studies about Saudis, about the UAE, mainly when the Abraham Accords happened, a lot of citizens were intrigued by the states, but Qatar, let's say, didn't get the well-deserved cover, let's say, it needed. So I wrote my master about the foreign relations of Saudi Arabia and Qatar from until 1990, before it became more exciting, and I want to go back to the days of the background, let's say, when nobody cares about them, but I think that it's important background that can explain a phenomenon that's happened today. This was my master, my PhD that's right now under writing, and I hope very soon will be approved, is about the religious identity of the state.
Okay.
And in Qatar, and actually in most of the Muslim countries, religion is a topic that can be relevant to sport and to women's rights and to sustainability and to politics and a lot of subjects. And this is why when I publish some articles and I have some lectures, some of them in Israel, some of them abroad, let's say, examine Qatar in many contexts. The context of relations of Israel in the 19th, in nowadays, the question of women's rights, elections, and many domestic and foreign relations.
Well, thank you. Can you give, so you've studied Qatar at great length. Can you give like a quick 2-minute overview of like the briefest history of Qatar?
Okay, it's a challenging question. But I will try. Yeah. Let's like that. It's a small country, we all know it, and let's say that between the royal houses of the Gulf, they are the youngest. The Al Thani regime, the Al Thani family. The first recorded evidence to their actions is, let's say, in the 80s. Let's say they just, the Saudis and the Kuwaiti and the Al Sabah and the Al Nahyan have, let's say, passed them 100 years. So they are the youngest in the Gulf. And over the years, they consolidate their power. When we talk about in the 1980, we can talk about a regime that's mainly Bedouin, or let's say the Qatari Peninsula was mainly about pearls. And just when we talk about 1940, we can talk about the oil. In the 1990, we can talk about gas. And the 19 there were three, let's say, motives that led to Qatar that we see today. First, it was the gas. The second, it was the younger generation that get tired from be dependent on the Saudis. And the third is when they get tired from the Saudis, they want to lean on the Americans.
Okay.
And this is why from then Qatar wants to establish itself as a prominent factor on the world stage. And they use their money, of course, but soft power, investment in sport, international events, forums, any way you can think of, they use it.
Definitely. So, for the purpose of the war in Israel right now, Qatar is kind of being zeroed in on because they are acting as a negotiation partner between Hamas and Israel, and the United States is a part of that as well. Qatar, I know, began negotiating with Hamas because President Bush asked them to keep an open line of communication. From my understanding, Qatar took a lot further than Bush intended, and they're kind of aiding and funding Hamas now. And that's kind of widely known in national security circles, yet they're still the ones participating in hostage negotiations. Can you talk a little bit about that? Did Qatar misinterpret what Bush said, in your opinion? Like, are they acting out of accordance with international law by funding a terror organization? Like, what are your thoughts?
So I think that the right point to start my answer is nowadays. The Qatari ambassador to the US, Marshal Al-Thani, was very eager to, let's say, clean Qatar from the association with a murderous organization as Hamas. And this is why, mainly during this war, Qatar tried to highlight that it's not us, it's the US that asked us to do so. And it's a MO that's familiar to Qatar because indeed, the US depend on Qatar to, let's say, conduct their dodgy business. And the mediation between Iran and the US and the hostage deal before the war, the mediation with Venezuela, the Qatari mediation between Russia and Ukraine. So let's say this is an MO that's very familiar to Doha to run the dodgy business of the U. But I can't say for certain that this was Bush fault or the US fault. I mean, we have from 1999.
Okay. Yeah, definitely. So Qatar funds Hamas. They're also an overseer of some of the humanitarian aid that the United States opens up sanctions to Iran. Can you talk about how they act as the overseer of those funds? I know they use cryptocurrency. And so when we talk about Qatar, they don't just fund Hamas, they fund a bunch of different things. You talked about soft power earlier. They donate to a lot of US institutions. When you talked about Qatari media, they fund Al Jazeera, everyone's favorite a lot of people in the United States only trust Al Jazeera because they think it's telling the truth, but really it is Qatari funded. But we've talked about the background on Qatar. Now I want to go kind of to your expertise about should the United States make any policy changes regarding Qatar, and do you think that Israel should trust Qatar with hostage negotiations? Two really big questions, but I'd love to know what you think.
I think that the two questions are connected. I mean, it's clear that Israel dependent on the U.S. in this war, and ask for its help and assistance against many fronts, the Houthis and the Hezbollah in the north. And this is why I think that we cannot separate Israel connections from the U.S. Desire, let's say, foreign policy. I think that both of the states needed to address Qatar with cautions. I mean, to think that we can eliminate them from the equation is not possible. They are intertwined in so many aspects of the international community. There were calls a decade ago when there were allegations that they support Jabhat al-Nusra, ISIS-like groups, terrorists in Mali, and God knows when, and God knows where. So there were calls to cut Qatar off completely. I can't see a situation when the US can do so, because it affects, you mentioned before, the universities and the money donation. There are institutions, the business community. There are many places the Qatari cleverly infiltrated themselves and tried to be a crucial component from the business community. Many like to say in the connection of soft power that Qatar hosted the World Cup in 20, but there are let's say ping pong champions in 2025 and FIBA in 2027. It's just a minor examples that you can't today talk about the international community, international business community, without mentioning Qatar and their donation. So this is why you can't cut Qatar off if you not, let's say, do a groundwork, extensive groundwork that find an alternative. Let's say we mentioned earlier the gas. Germany chose the Qatari gas over the Russian gas. So if we are gonna cut Qatar, we need to consider there is no alternative option, or there is, and we need to search for it and to establish it, and it's not a haste move you can do. I think that, again, I'm not a policymaker, so I'm trying to be modest here, but I think that Israel specifically, because it suffered from Qatar actions, and Qatar financed the Hamas and others, but even the US need to address it. It's a state, let's say, a hostile state, that the way we are fighting with them is not the way we fight with other states. Let's say when with Iran, you do it by sanctions, and you do it by, let's say, economic restrictions, and even sometimes military campaigns. But in Qatar, you need to be more PR, good coverage, and see it as their soft belly, to look on their disadvantage with the minor population and their minor land coverage, to use it as an incentive, or let's say even a threat to the Qatari regime, and therefore to exploit this situation for the US and Israel benefits. You need to do it, let's say, in multilateral options. You need to, in the same time, talk with them, but when you conduct business, you need to consider that it's not a trustworthy state. It's a state you need, at the same time, when you made a negotiation with them, to try to find an alternative, to find how you can put pressure, not to see it as a negotiation that you need to please, but as a negotiation, you need to make sure it's not, let's say, go beyond this scope of what you allowed.
Definitely. Then 2 more questions. So Qatar, I understand, will go under a leadership change over the next few years, kind of like how the Saudis went through a leadership change and changed to the crown prince of Mohammed bin Salman. Am I mistaken on that?
I can't say this is true. I mean, the Athani regime is still in power. Just a decade ago, Hamad bin Khalifa HBK transferred the emir position to his son, Emir Tamim bin Hamad, and is not going anywhere. He's gonna stay there. They promised reforms and they have elections, but it's for central municipal council. It's for, let's say like that, for city level decisions, not for state level decisions.
Not for the state level. Okay, so I was mistaken there. And then, so no, nothing to look forward to with leadership changes, people getting better.
No, we can see maybe they're gonna replace the prime minister from another prime minister, but probably both of them will be from Al Thani family. Still, the important families will continue to hold the important position in the government sector and in the business sector.
Awesome. And then just zooming out, as an Israeli, what are your thoughts on the war going on right now? How are you doing with it?
It's harsh, let's say like that. I mean,
Yeah.
as one that's covered mainly Qatar, you can see just in this area that Israel, I think, hoped to be in a much better place 2 months into the war. And right now, it's still a situation that will depend on the Qataris and Egypt and US assistance. And still, I think that Israel kind of disappointing that it's not going, let's say, as we hoped, it's going to be more easy win, or let's say without so many casualties in the army and in the civilian sector. So I think that Qatar in vis-a-vis Israel is an example to why this is not another war. It's different from other wars that Israel experienced over their 75 years.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much. I will link your Twitter on this. Is there anything else you want to say to, I mean, my followers are mostly Jewish in America or Canada. Is there anything anything else you'd like to say?
I know that I made contact with American jury figures that contact me about Qatar when they tried to figure out the states. I think that when you look at the state, you need to remember that the norms of Qatar, it's not the Western norms. It's a norms that can even sometimes exploit or take advantage of Western norms, or let's say what we see as a common sense to their benefit. So I think it's important to remember there's difference in state of mind between the place you mentioned. And the second, thank you for having me.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you so much. I'll stop recording.